Comment, like, subscribe. The bell keeps you notified. It helps the show thrive. The word monopoly has been around for quite some time, with it ultimately coming from the Greek word monopolion, which comes from the Greek mono, meaning alone/single, and polein, meaning to sell. The modern Oxford English Dictionary definition of the word, however, is the exclusive possession or control of the trade in a commodity, product, or service, the condition of having no competitor in one's trade or business, also an instance of this, with their earliest recording of the word in English being in 1534. Today, however, when most people hear the word monopoly, they don't think of exclusive possession of a service or commodity like the OED definition laid out. They instead think of something else entirely. This is because while monopoly in this way is in fact a noun, it is more commonly used today as the proper noun for one of the most popular board games on our planet today. You know the one, with the coloured tiles, where you play as a little metal dog or hat or thimble, and it has hundreds of different versions. And of course, it takes forever to play, and by the end, no one is actually enjoying themselves. Yeah, I must admit, as a board game fan, I despise this game. It's boring and not fun, and due to its popularity, it has shaped for so many people their views on what board games are and what to expect from them. If you want to play some actually good board games, go check out Ticket to Ride or Carcassonne or Wingspan. After playing any of those, you'll never want to play Monopoly again. But nevertheless, Monopoly holds a special place in the hearts of a lot of people, and while I don't find the mechanics or the playing of the game particularly interesting, what is super interesting is the history of this game, and of course its name. As the title of this video tells us, Monopoly wasn't always called Monopoly. Monopoly's origins are pretty much the exact opposite of what the game is all about now. While the game now sees the amassing of wealth and property as a good thing is literally what you need to do to win, that wasn't always the case. The game actually started its life as a demonstration of how bad it is if single people or entities were to own huge amounts of things. This story starts with a woman by the name of Elizabeth Maggie. Maggie was a stenographer in Washington, DC, though she was way more than that. She was an artist, writer, actor, inventor, and radical feminist. She was also a big believer in Henry George's single tax theory. George was an American economist, and his single tax theory was the government should be funded for a single tax on land, meaning wealthy landowners would have to pay more than those who didn't own huge strips of land. This is seen by many as an extremely radical concept, yet it was one Lizzie Maggie really believed in. Not only did she believe in it, but she wanted more people to understand how they would benefit from this taxation system in a clear and easy to understand way. Initially, she taught classes in her evenings after work, but these classes were not reaching enough people. So instead of teaching, she wanted to explain her political beliefs in a more creative and interactive way, and she found just the medium to present her ideas. It was at the turn of the 20th century that board games became increasingly more popular. Not only were they becoming popular, but they were also helping convey messages and thoughts too. Most noticeably was it The Game of Life, which was first produced in 1860 and is dubbed the USA's first popular board game. The Game of Life involves having to play through parts of life such as school and marriage to achieve a happy and successful life. This concept of a board game teaching people things is seen in other late 19th century board games too, like The Mansion of Happiness, which existed to teach children how to live a good Christian life. With this boom in board game popularity, Maggie realised that it was through rolls with the dice and moving counters in which she'd be more able to share her political beliefs. Maggie got to work on her game. It involved a board which you would go round and around multiple times during each session, which was pretty unusual unto itself, as at the time most board games just had a start and an end. Each space on the board represented something you could buy, a street or a railroad, and so on. The game also featured fake money and fake deeds for the things they owned, though perhaps most recognisable was the fact that even in this initial version of the game, it had a corner labelled with those three famous words of "Go to jail." This game was very similar to the game of Monopoly we know to this day. However, there were some noticeable changes. First off, for the sake of justifying this as a name explain video, it of course had a completely different name. Initially, Initially, this game was not called Monopoly, it was instead called the Landlord Game, and this name reflected the realities of what it was like to be a landowner. As Maggie put it herself when writing about it in a political magazine, it is a practical demonstration of the present system of land grabbing with all its usual outcomes and consequences. Maggie also created two different rule sets. There was the Monopolist rule set, in which each player aimed to make the most money and crush opponents, and the anti-Monopolist rule set, in which each player was rewarded when wealth was created. Happy with a final version of the Landlord's Game, she got a legal patent for it in 1903, and it was around 2 years later in which a published version of the game appeared. The game was initially popular with left-wing thinkers who agreed with the motives and teachings the game was conveying. Over the next 30 or so years, the game would really catch on in many ways and spread across the northeast of the USA. People even went on to make their own unofficial versions of the game, with different boards and rules, which all had a similar theme of buying property. It had just become one of those games that people played without knowing all too much about it. What's interesting is that out of those two rule sets, the Monopoly rules and anti-Monopoly rules, the latter seems to have been forgotten about, with more people leaning towards just playing the Monopoly version of the game. This is thought to be because this rule set leaned into the natural human instinct to compete with one another. One of the most noticeable versions of the game to come about was the one that was created by the Quaker community in Atlantic City. They used the names of streets in Atlantic City on the board to represent the properties you could purchase. It was this version that was first played by one Charles Darrow. Darrow was born in 1889 and had held various jobs. By the 1930s, however, the Great Depression hit him hard and he needed to earn money to support his family. When his friends introduced him to this game they'd been playing, Darrow enjoyed it so much that they played it many times over. When Darrow asked what the game was called, he wasn't answered with the Landlord's Game. It seemed that the game had changed and been adapted so much during all this time that that name had lost relevancy. Instead, people were simply calling it the Monopoly Game, because what you did in it was build monopolies. All across the northeast of the USA, you could find different groups of people playing different versions of these Monopoly games, all of which share a common ancestor with Maggie's Landlord Game, which had become somewhat forgotten. It was in this time that Charles Darrow had the idea of making a standardized version of the game that could be sold all across the USA. He actually got to work on his version of the game with his family, making the board with a piece of cloth as opposed to cardboard, and even hired a graphic designer to make those now iconic images like the Go arrow and the train station signs. As for the properties on the board, Darrow stuck with the streets of Atlantic City, as that was the version he was introduced to. Quick side note, but I've never played this version of the game. The standard UK edition uses the streets of London. It seems strange to me at first that the standard is Atlantic City and not somewhere more well known in the USA, like NYC or Washington DC, but as mentioned, the version Darrow based his version off of was created by Quakers in Atlantic City who use Atlantic street names. But what's interesting is that the Atlantic street names used have a pretty pan-American feel to them. It includes names like New York Avenue, Boardwalk, Tennessee Avenue, and even just States Avenue. These street names have a very broad sound to them, like they could be anywhere or completely fictitious. Despite being just based on Atlantic City, the names cover a pretty large chunk of the United States. Anyway, it was in the 1930s he sold this version of the game to Parker Brothers. As I'm sure you can gather by the game's popularity today, it was a huge success, making Charles Darrow the first person to become a millionaire from a board game. This tale of a down-on-his-luck Darrow creating the game Monopoly, then making his millions off of it, is usually recited as one of those classic tales of human ingenuity in time of crisis, following that classic American dream idea that anyone can become a millionaire of one great idea. This was the story of Monopoly's origins for some time. For a spell, Parker Brothers even dubbed Charles Darrow as the creator of the game. Now of course we know that that was not the case. Darrow simply standardized an adaptation of the much older Landlord's Game created by Elizabeth Maggie. You may now even be wondering if Maggie even had a say in any of this, of Charles adapting her game to make his fortune, and it seems that she was in fact aware of this happening. Parker Brothers bought the patent for the game from her for just $500, and she received no further royalties. While seemingly happy with this at first, as time went on she became more angered, realizing that not only had her game been completely changed but lost its initial message, but she had lost out on a huge amount of wealth, which was going to the pockets of Darrow and Parker Brothers instead. She wrote articles and did interviews expressing her unhappiness with losing her game, but it seems to have come to no avail. By the time she died in 1948, she'd been pretty much forgotten about, with her headstone not saying anything about the widely popular board game she created for the world. After this, Parker Brothers carried on perpetuating the story of Darrow in regards to the game's creation, with no mention of Maggie, who initially created the game, or many of the other people who shaped it before Darrow simply standardized it. Thankfully, in 1973, Maggie's story would come to light more. It was in this year that one Ralph Anspach came into legal trouble from Parker Brothers due to his anti-Monopoly game. In trying to defend himself, he learnt more about the true origins of Monopoly and Maggie's work to demonstrate that the Parker Brothers had just copied the game themselves. Anspach shared Maggie's story with a wider audience and helped break the narrative that the game was created solely by Darrow. Parker Brothers, who have since been bought by Hasbro, however, still would like to highlight the Darrow narrative. Journalist Calvin Trillin wrote on the matter, saying the Darrow story is a nice, clean, well-structured example of the Eureka School of American industrial legend, which in turn makes it easier to share. But of course, while Darrow did play a huge role in popularizing the game, he didn't create it. So next time you play Monopoly, though as I mentioned earlier on, I'd recommend playing literally anything else, think about Elizabeth Maggie, and of course her initial name for this game, before it lost all its meaning under the name Monopoly, the Landlord Game. This video topic was suggested by BJ Windsor over on my Patreon. Every Wednesday, I put up a video request post on my Patreon for my awesome patrons to leave video ideas on. I then pick one of those ideas to be turned into a video the following Wednesday. So if you have a great idea for a Name Explain video and wish to enjoy Name Explain videos ad-free as well as get exclusive content, then why not support the channel on Patreon? It takes just $1 a month to help the channel in a huge way and gets you all of these amazing benefits. Visit patreon.com/nameexplain or click the link down below. Name Explain depends on viewers like yourself supporting the channel financially on Patreon, so a huge thank you to everyone who does. Donating just $1 a month helps the channel amazingly and gets you bonuses including ad-free videos, exclusive content, and the power to request ideas to be made into actual Name Explain videos. $2 a month gets you all that, plus your name here with all these awesome people. Visit patreon.com/nameexplain or click the link down below to find out how you too can support the channel. Thank you. Thanks for reaching the end of the video. Why not watch another and subscribe to keep up to date on all things Name Explain. You can find myself on Instagram where I'm NameExplainYT, and join the Facebook group Friends of Name Explain to talk with myself and other name nerds. All that will be linked down below. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video, and once again, thank you all so much.